Welcome to a special episode of the Hacks Roundup, where we'll be covering the hacks from both June and July of 2023. So we'll be discussing the largest smart contract hacks in these months, as well as some of the smaller hacks. We'll also talk briefly about rug pulls and private key compromises. Now, in these 2 months, we've seen over $500 million lost due to Web3 security incidents. We've seen over 82 million lost due to smart contract hacks, over 239 million lost due to rug pulls, and over 223 million lost due to compromised keys. Of the funds lost, only about 20 million was recovered. And July had the highest losses out of any other month in 2023 so far. Let's start with the largest hack in July of 2023. And this is actually the second largest smart contract hack of 2023 so far after Rodeo Finance. This hack occurred due to a Vyper compiler bug. Vyper is a Pythonic programming language for writing smart contracts. In fact, it's the second most popular language for writing smart contracts in the EVM ecosystem. On July 31st, multiple curve pools were exploited due to a Vyper bug that was introduced 2 years ago in several versions. Due to this vulnerability, over 69 million was lost from multiple curve pools. Now, several protocols were impacted by this hack because many protocols do rely on curve. So the first victim over here was JPEG. At first, alerts attributed the exploit to read-only reentrancy. However, upon further analysis, this turned out to be a more classic type of reentrancy where the function which was re-entered was actually a state-changing function. Some people speculated that the exploit resulted from a lack of reentrancy protection. However, as we'll soon see, there actually were reentrancy guards present, it's just that they weren't working as expected. Here's a diagram of the JPEG exploit. There's 3 function calls in particular that we're going to look at closely. First, we have this call to add liquidity. So this is when you add liquidity to the curve pool. Then we have a call here to remove liquidity, which removes liquidity from the curve pool. Now, while this remove liquidity function is executing, you can see that the add liquidity function is called again. So basically, the contract has been re-entered through this add liquidity function. And because of this reentrancy, the attacker was able to mint more shares than they should have actually been able to mint. So there's 2 reasons that it was possible to re-enter while the remove liquidity function was executing. The first reason is that the remove liquidity function does not follow the checkEffects interactions pattern. It makes state changes after making external calls. And the second reason, and more important for this hack, is that the reentrancy guards for this contract were not functioning as expected due to that Vyper compiler bug. Here's the code for both those functions, add liquidity and remove liquidity. And you can see that both of these functions do have a non-reentrant lock. And for both of these functions, the lock has the same name. So how can it be possible to re-enter the add liquidity function while the remove liquidity function is still executing? Well, the problem here was that these 2 locks turned out to be completely independent. And let's have a closer look at this in this detailed trace of the hack, which shows us all the opcodes. So first, we'll look at the first add liquidity call. So the first 2 opcodes here deal with the reentrancy guard. So first, the reentrancy guard is going to load the lock from storage. So in this case, it's going to load the lock from the storage slot 0 over here. And the value it retrieves is 0 because this function is not locked. The next opcode over here actually will lock this function, because it's going to store 1 into this storage slot 0. Next, we have a call to remove liquidity. And once again, the first 2 opcodes here deal with the reentrancy guard. However, something strange happens in this first opcode. You can see that the opcode is actually loading the lock from storage slot 2, and it's loading a value of 0. So the strange thing here is that it's loading from a different storage slot than add liquidity was loading from. Remove liquidity is loading from storage slot 2, and add liquidity is removing or loading the storage slot 0 over here. So remove liquidity is then going to store 1 in the storage slot 2 over here. Next, over here, when the remove liquidity function continues execution, Ether is sent back to the attack contract. And when this happens, the fallback function is invoked on the attack contract. The attack contract is then going to try and call this add liquidity function again. And here in these first two opcodes, you can see the activity of the reentrancy guard. This time, add liquidity is trying to load the lock from storage slot 0. And this is going to have a value of 0, because remember that remove liquidity set the lock on storage slot 2. And so this reentrancy guard check has essentially been bypassed, because the add liquidity function is using a different storage slot for its lock than remove liquidity. The root cause of this can be traced to a Vyper compiler bug. And you can see this in the function over here called setStorageSlots. You can see that the storage slot is incremented for every function regardless of the lock name. And so remove liquidity and add liquidity had two separate locks in two different storage slots. To summarize, you might have thought you locked your treasure chest, but you actually locked the trash can instead. Let's move on to the second largest hack of July of 2023. Here's a chart of the TVL of Conic Finance. You can see that after the hack happened on July of 21st, that the TVL of the protocol dropped massively. Now, Conic Finance is an Ethereum-based yield farming protocol. It consists of several omnipools which allow the deposit of a single type of assets such as Ether or Curve USD. Now, each of these omnipool is going to take that liquidity, such as ETH, and spread it between multiple Curve pools. Then the protocol hangs on to the Curve LP tokens in order to earn yield. On July 21st, the ETH omnipool was hacked for 3.2 million through a read-only reentrancy exploit. Later on, in the same day, the Curve USD omnipool was also hacked with a different type of exploit for approximately 934K. The root cause of the first exploit was read-only reentrancy. And like we've seen with many read-only reentrancy hacks in the past, the main step of the hack happens when removing liquidity from some platform, in this case, removing liquidity from Curve. So when this happens, Curve first burns the LP tokens, and this reduces the total supply of LP tokens. So now there is an imbalance created between the total supply of LP tokens and the reserves of the pool. As a result, the getVirtualPrice function is going to return an inflated price. Now, when the ETH is withdrawn to the attack contract, the fallback function is invoked. And in this fallback function, the attack contract is going to withdraw ETH from the Conic pool. And the Conic pool calls the getVirtualPrice function to determine the worth of the LP token. And because this is providing an inflated value over here, Conic actually gives the attacker far more ETH than it really should. And so the attacker is effectively able to steal ETH from the Conic protocol. Let's go through each step of the first exploit. So the attacker starts by taking a flash loan of ETH. They then add this ETH to the Curve pool to receive LP tokens. Next, they deposit some of the ETH into the Omni pool to receive Conic LP tokens. And in the fourth step, they remove liquidity from Curve. So this will burn their Curve LP tokens, and the callback function on the attack contract is invoked. Within this callback function, the attack contract withdraws more ETH than the actual worth of its LP tokens, effectively stealing value from the Conic protocol. Let's go over the second exploit which happened on Conic Finance. So in this exploit, the attacker started by borrowing Curve USD from Curve. Then they swapped Curve USD for USDC within the Curve pool. So this made the Curve pool very imbalanced. There was too much Curve USD in the pool and not enough USDC. Then the attacker deposited some Curve USD to Conic, which unfavorably added Curve USD as liquidity to Curve. Remember that the Curve pool is already imbalanced and it already has too much Curve USD. So the protocol is being forced to make a very unfavorable trade by adding Curve USD as liquidity to Curve. Then the attacker simply counter trades by swapping USDC to Curve USD in the Curve pool. Then the attacker withdraws Curve USD from Conic and simply repeats these steps to maximize their profit. Now, both exploits were front-run by an MEV bot. In the case of the second exploit, the MEV bot actually returned a fraction of the funds. The team was notified of the hack by a monitoring platform, and the team did not pause all the vaults initially, as the first vulnerability only impacted the ETH Omnipool. However, that second exploit happened later in the day, and once that happened, the team did pause all the Omnipools. Later on, a postmortem was published. This vulnerability of Curve LP tokens has been known since last year. Now, one possible fix would be to call a cheap state-changing function on the Curve pool before retrieving the price. So this ensures that when you're retrieving the price, you're not re-entering the Curve contract. Known vulnerabilities of tokens should be considered as part of the process when deciding to add a collateral or yield token into a protocol. And as part of this, a security or audit team could be consulted to check known vulnerabilities of this collateral or yield token and advise on how to integrate it safely. In the case of the second exploit, reliable oracles should be used to ensure that the protocol is not making unfavorable trades. Let's move on to the EraLend hack, which also happened in July. Here's a chart of the TVL of EraLend, and you can see that there's a considerable drop in TVL after the hack. EraLend is a compound fork deployed on ZK Sync. The protocol supported LP tokens from SyncSwap as collateral. SyncSwap is a DEX on ZK Sync. Now, the protocol was hacked on 25th of July due to a read-only reentrancy vulnerability, which resulted in a loss of 3.4 million. Now, the root cause here is very, very similar to the Conic Finance hack that we just discussed. In this case, however, when the attacker removes liquidity, they remove liquidity from SyncSwap, not Curve. And they do this by calling the burn function. The first thing this burn function does here is it burns liquidity tokens, and this reduces the supply of LP tokens. Now there's an imbalance between the LP token supply and the reserves within the pool. And so the attacker is able to exploit this imbalance to take a massive under-collateralized loan when the callback over here happens. This will invoke a function on the attack contract, and that function on the attack contract is going to take a massive under-collateralized loan from EraLend. And EraLend allows this because it thinks that the collateral of the attack contract is worth far more than it really is, because it's now estimating that the SyncSwap token is worth far more than it really is. The attacker started by taking a flash loan of ETH and USDC. They added these as liquidity to the SyncSwap pool and received LP tokens. They then added some of these SyncSwap LP tokens as collateral to EraLend. Next, they removed liquidity from SyncSwap by calling that burn function. A callback function was invoked on the attack contract as part of this burn function, and in that callback function, the attacker was able to take a massive under-collateralized loan from EraLend, effectively stealing funds. Now, the team did post Twitter and Discord responses on the same day as the hack, and they warned users not to deposit more funds into the protocol. The protocol contracts were also paused by the team. Interestingly enough, many common monitoring platforms did not detect this hack, and this might be because these platforms did not yet support ZK Sync. This could be an issue as ZK rollups gain more adoption, as there seems to be this monitoring gap for these new chains. Now, as mentioned in the Conic Finance hack, this vulnerability has been known for quite a while, and the prevention steps here are very similar to the Conic Finance hack. One point we'll add here is that for lending protocols, we should place limits on new or risky collateral tokens, including how much can be borrowed against them and how much can be supplied of this risky asset to the protocol. Let's move on to Atlantis Loans, which was one of the larger security incidents in June of 2023. Atlantis Loans is a multi-chain lending protocol. It is also a compound fork deployed on Binance Smart Chain, Polygon, as well as Avalanche. The project had actually been abandoned in early April after a previous attack. And on June 13th, 2.5 million was stolen from users of the protocol through a governance attack. Let's have a look at the TVL of Atlantis Loans. You can see that the TVL dropped pretty much to zero after the hack in April. So how does the hack happen on a protocol with zero TVL in June over here? Well, the problem here is that users still had pending approvals for the Atlantis Loans contract, and the attacker was able to take advantage of these pending approvals in order to steal funds directly from the users' wallets. So the attacker started by creating a malicious proposal and voting for it. They had enough voting power to pass this proposal, and once passed, the attacker was able to execute the proposal, causing the admin of many contracts to be changed to the attacker's account. The attacker then uses their newly found admin privileges to maliciously upgrade several Atlantis contracts, especially several C-token contracts. This is because these are the contracts you'd expect users to approve. The attacker is then able to exploit the pending approvals from the users by calling a malicious function on these upgraded C-token contracts in order to transfer tokens from the user wallets directly to the attacker. Now, since this project had been abandoned, there was no official response from the protocol team. A community-based Twitter account did post a warning to users on the same day as the exploit. Users were warned to revoke allowances from Atlantis contracts. Also, several security-focused Twitter accounts posted warnings about the impending hack. Monitoring should be available for users and not just protocols. And the problem here is that abandoned protocols are not likely to warn users in time of an impending hack. And so users need this additional layer of protection. Also, users should revoke approvals and withdraw liquidity as soon as a project has been abandoned. This is because new bugs could be discovered in a project and these funds could be stolen. Also, the project may be susceptible to a governance attack, basically what happened in this case. Also, the theft of governance token is not a one-time event. So the Atlantis Loans governance tokens were stolen in the April incident, and so it was possible for the attacker to reuse those governance tokens in order to pass this malicious proposal. Now, users who have pending token allowances are vulnerable until these allowances are revoked, even if they have zero funds within the protocol. Let's move on to Rodeo protocol, which was also hacked in July. Rodeo is a leverage yield farming protocol on Arbitrum. The protocol lost over 880K over multiple transactions which were executing the same exploit. The attack was successful due to the manipulation of a price oracle. Now, the root cause of this hack was the manipulation of a price reported by Rodeo's oracle for the WETH unsheathed pair. The oracle reports time-weighted average prices based on the ratio of WETH to unsheathed reserves in Rodeo's DEX contract. Basically, the oracle reports the average of the last 4 prices previously recorded. These prices are recorded in updates which occur every 15 minutes. So basically, the attacker sandwiched each of these 15-minute price updates by making a massive swap from WETH to unsheathed before the price update and then swapping back immediately after the update. And they did this several times so that the price used was an average of manipulated prices. Also, the WETH unsheathed pair had relatively low liquidity, and so the attacker was able to have a very significant impact on the reserves by making these swaps before the oracle updates. Now, users were able to open leverage farming positions in Rodeo by calling the earn function and specifying the strategy to be used. In this case, the attacker specified a strategy which would swap USDC to wrapped ether to unsheath. And this forced the protocol to use that manipulated price of wrapped ether and unsheath. And so because of this, the protocol was forced into making unfavorable trades from wrapped ether to unsheath. And so the attacker could simply counter trade in the other direction and make a profit. In one transaction, the attacker was able to receive 97 wrapped ether for just putting in 47 unsheath. And this attack was repeated over multiple transactions to maximize the profit. So the attacker started by swapping a large amount of wrapped ether to unsheath right before the Oracle price was recorded. And they did this several times in order to have the average price consist of different prices that were manipulated. Next, the attacker opened a leverage position within the protocol, which forced the protocol to swap USDC to wrapped ether to unsheath at an unfavorable price. Then the attacker simply counter-traded by trading unsheath for wrapped ether, and they repeated this process many times. They also used flash loans to maximize their profitability, and finally they bridged their funds and laundered their gains. Now, the actual preparation for the hack, which was the price manipulation, started about 2 hours before the actual hack. Once the hack took place, news about the hack was tweeted about 45 minutes after it actually happened. A few hours after that, the team confirmed the hack and paused the protocol. They also reached out to the attacker on-chain, but the attacker has not yet replied. The team is also currently working with auditors to review the rest of the protocol. The way to prevent these types of vulnerabilities is to implement robust oracles which are resilient against manipulation. These oracles should reference data from multiple sources to ensure validity. This is something that Chainlink does. The oracle should be audited, especially if it's a custom implementation by the protocol team. Also, effective monitoring and alerting with platforms such as Hypernative can mitigate the damage or even prevent the hack entirely. In this case, the hack preparation started a couple hours before the actual hack when the price was manipulated. So perhaps if this was detected, the hack may have been prevented. Also, it's good to avoid relying on the price of low liquidity pairs, as low liquidity pairs can be more easily manipulated, as was the case in this hack. Let's move on to Palmswap, which was also hacked in July. Palmswap offers perpetual futures and leverage trading on the BNB chain. Due to some calculation errors during liquidity removal, the protocol suffered a loss of about 901k USDT. The original attacker actually failed to execute the exploit due to providing insufficient gas, and an MEV bot was able to front-run the attack. The MEV bot operator returned 80% of these funds and kept 20% as a bounty. Now, there are two important protocol-specific tokens that we should mention here. First, we have PLP, which is the LP token of Palmswap. If you supply liquidity to Palmswap, you will receive PLP. Next, we have USDP, which is the stablecoin of the protocol. Now, with Palmswap, the root cause was the manipulation of the price of PLP, and this allowed the redeeming of PLP for an excessive amount of USDP. The price of PLP is based on the ratio of the total value within the vault to the total supply of the PLP token. And the attacker was able to mint PLP tokens by providing 1 USD per PLP token. However, when redeeming the PLP token, they were able to receive approximately 2 USDP for each PLP token they redeemed. Now, the price of PLP is determined by taking the USDT in the pool and dividing it by the PLP supplied. And the attacker was able to increase the USDT in the pool without increasing the PLP supplied by calling this buy USDP function. So the buy USDP function allows a user to buy USDP with USDT. The USDT then becomes part of the AUM of the protocol. And so this first number in the price goes higher, and the second number here stays the same. So overall, the price goes up. And when the attacker removes liquidity, they're able to redeem those PLP tokens at a much higher price, essentially receiving more PLP than they really should have. So the attacker starts by receiving a flash loan of 3 million USDT. They take 1 million of this USDT and add it as liquidity and immediately stake the received PLP tokens. Next, the attacker uses the remaining 2 million USDT to call the buy USDP function to receive approximately 2 million USDP. That 2 million USDT becomes part of the AUM of the protocol, thereby inflating the price of PLP. Next, the attacker unstakes and removes their PLP tokens in order to redeem these PLP tokens for an excessive amount of USDP due to that price manipulation of the PLP token. Finally, the attacker is able to sell all these USDP tokens in order to realize their profit. News about the exploit was tweeted a few hours after it actually occurred. The team acknowledged the hack publicly one day after the hack happened. And one day after that, the team announced that a deal was made with the attacker. And finally, the team made an official announcement that the funds were returned. So this was about 80% of the funds that were returned. Thorough testing with an attacking mindset on a mainnet fork could detect such vulnerabilities. So in this case, the root cause of the vulnerability was the price manipulation of the PLP token. So it's worth asking what components of this price calculation can be manipulated. And so writing tests with the intention of manipulating this price may have helped to detect such vulnerabilities. Next, we have Rodeo Finance, which was hacked in June of 2023. Sturdy is a lending protocol as well as a leverage yield farming protocol on Ethereum. It supports both Balancer and Curve LP tokens as collateral. On June 11th, the protocol was hacked for $800K due to a read-only reentrancy attack. The root cause of the hack was a read-only reentrancy vulnerability, and essentially this is very similar to the Conic Finance hack and the EraLend hack. In this case, the hack happened. The main step of the hack was when liquidity was removed from Balancer. So the LP tokens were burned from Balancer, resulting in the total supply of LP tokens decreasing. This created an imbalance between the total supply of the LP tokens and the reserves of the pool. As a result, GetRate returned an inflated price. Now, when ETH is withdrawn to the attack contract, the fallback function is invoked. And in this fallback function, the attacker disables a certain collateral that they had in the protocol. And Sturdy allows this because it seems as though the Balancer LP token is sufficient to support the attacker's debt, whereas in fact it is not. So after they disable this collateral, they're subsequently able to withdraw this collateral prematurely from the protocol, leaving an uncollateralized position in the protocol and effectively stealing funds from the protocol. The team reacted fairly quickly and paused the protocol within an hour of the exploit occurring. The root cause was determined within a few hours of the exploit. Fixes were developed, deployed, and reviewed by auditors in the subsequent days. All users were made whole eventually. So the prevention for this vulnerability is similar to Conic Finance and EraLend, but here's a couple of points we'd like to add for this one. In the case of Balancer LP tokens, there is a nice library available called Vault Reentrancy Lib, and this allows you to block read-only reentrancy with a view function. So this is very convenient as your function to read prices is very likely to be a view function. Also, in the case of Sturdy, they actually had read-only reentrancy protection in most of their functions, and there was only one function that was missing this protection. And this led to the hack. So it's important to make sure that every single function that depends on the price of the token has this read-only reentrancy protection. Pawnfi was also hacked in June. Pawnfi is an NFT liquidity protocol deployed on Ethereum. Pawnfi allows users to supply their NFTs as collateral to borrow other tokens. NFTs can be exchanged for 1,000 P tokens as well, and these P tokens can be used for several different purposes on the protocol, such as swapping them for other NFTs. On June 17th, the protocol was hacked for about $820K, including the loss of several NFTs such as Bored Apes and Mutant Apes. The root cause of the vulnerability lay within this function, which is called Deposit and Borrow Ape and Stake. This function allows the user to borrow tokens and also deposit the NFT collateral in the same function call. So the borrow part happens in the first part of the function, and the deposit of the NFT collateral happens over here in this deposit NFT to lending function. This function takes a parameter, which is an array, and it's actually passed in by the user, the caller of this function. So it's possible to pass an empty array into this function, and in this case, no NFTs will be transferred to the protocol. Let's take a closer look at that function. So in this function, you can see that this array parameter is here, and if the array is empty, you can see that most of the code will not be executed because length will equal to 0. And so there will be no transfer of NFT assets. So effectively, the attacker has been able to borrow funds without actually transferring the NFT collateral. Hypernative detected the attack contract deployment, and this deployment actually happened 5 minutes before the hack itself. The Pawnfi team posted a Twitter update a few hours following the hack. They claimed that no user funds were lost and all losses were from Pawnfi's liquidity reserve fund. Negative test cases may have detected this type of issue. In this case, we have a problem where this empty array parameter was used in a way that it should not have been possible. So it's good to have test cases which test unexpected input, and fuzz testing can also help to cover such cases. Audits can also help to detect similar vulnerabilities. Also, attacks may be prevented by responding quickly to alerts provided by monitoring platforms such as Hypernative. Biswap was hacked in July, and Biswap is a DEX on the BNB chain. The problem here was a vulnerable migrator contract which allowed for anyone to call the migration function with very flexible parameters. So the attacker was able to create a fake token pair in Biswap and use this to manipulate the migrated contract into stealing other users' funds. The hack resulted in a loss of over 710K. So Biswap was upgrading from V2 to V3 of the protocol, and they were doing this through, or facilitating this through a migration contract with this migrate function over here. The way it works is that users were to approve the migration contract to transfer their V2 LP tokens. Then when the migrate function was called, it would burn the user's V2 LP tokens and then transfer the underlying assets to V3 and give the users their V3 LP tokens. However, the attacker was able to transfer funds from accounts that approved the migration contract and effectively steal funds from these users who had approved the migration contract. The attacker started by creating a fake pool in Biswap with fake tokens. Next, the attacker found which victim addresses could be exploited, and they did this by querying which addresses have large approvals for the migrator contract. Next, the attacker invoked the migrate function with the legitimate pool but with fake tokens. This resulted in the burning of the victim's LP tokens, and the underlying assets were transferred to the migration contract. Then the attacker invoked the migrate function again, and this time the attacker specified the fake pool but the actual tokens. And so when this happened, the attacker received the actual legitimate tokens in the migration contract, effectively stealing these tokens from the previous liquidity providers. Validation to ensure the authenticity of LP tokens and liquidity pools would prevent this type of exploit. In this case, the attacker was able to spoof the LP tokens and liquidity pool in order to execute this exploit. Also, access control on the migration function could block the attackers from abusing it. For example, if this migration function is only intended to be called by administrators, then only administrators should be allowed to call the function. Biswap allows permissionless pool and token creation, and whenever a protocol gives this much power to the users, the protocol must be resistant to any abnormal or malicious pools that have been created by users. Thorough audits are also likely to detect such vulnerabilities. Now, a huge source of losses in Web3 were rug pulls, and this was particularly the case in June and July of 2023. The largest incident by far was the multi-chain issue, which resulted in a loss of $229 million on multiple chains. In this case, the funds held by the bridge were unexpectedly transferred to other addresses on multiple chains. Then we have GMeta on the Binance Smart Chain, which was a classic rug pull whereby a large amount of GMeta tokens were swapped for almost all the USDT liquidity in the DEX pair. Then we have Pawn0x on Ethereum, and in this case, the function was added to the token, which lets anyone transfer anyone else's tokens. And so the attacker was able to manipulate the reserves in the DEX pool in order to drain the liquidity from the DEX pool. Then we have Conic Finance, which had a privileged withdrawal function that allowed this privileged address to withdraw on behalf of users. And with DeFi Labs, there was a very similar withdrawal function which allowed for the rug pull to happen. Private key compromises also accounted for a huge amount of losses in June and July of 2023. The largest incident was the Atomic Wallet hack, which saw a loss of over 100 million. Possible root causes for this hack include infrastructure breach, viruses on user devices, malware injection, and man-in-the-middle attacks. However, the root cause has not been confirmed by the Atomic Wallet team as yet. Then we have AlphaPo, which saw about 60 million lost on ETH, Tron, and Bitcoin. And AlphaPo is a crypto payments processor, and its hot wallets were compromised. The root cause is unknown at this time. Coinspade is also a crypto payments processor and lost around 37 million. This time, social engineering and public-facing applications were used by the attacker to gain information about the infrastructure. The attackers then discovered an application running on the infrastructure which can be used to exploit the service. And through this, they were able to steal funds from the service. Next, we have the Poly network, which saw around 26 million lost due to compromised private keys. In the Poly network, the function to unlock funds on the destination chain requires 3 out of 4 keepers to sign the request. Essentially, these keepers should only sign the request if it's valid. However, the attacker was able to take control of the private keys of these keepers and sign an invalid request. Effectively, the attacker was able to unlock funds at will, and so they were able to steal all these funds from the Poly network. Let's have a look at some of the smaller exploits in June and July. First up, we have Hashflow, which saw around 600k lost on Ethereum. And in fact, it was a deprecated contract that was hacked, and Hashflow was no longer using this contract. However, the problem was that this contract still had pending user approvals, and these approvals were taken advantage of to transfer users' approved tokens to the attacker. Fortunately, this was purely a white hat hack, and the attacker allowed the users to withdraw all of their funds from the attack contract. Next, we had the Midas hack on Binance Smart Chain. This is actually the second time Midas was hacked in 2023. The cause of this hack was very similar to the cause of the 100 Finance hack a couple of months back. The attacker manipulated the exchange rate between the C token and the underlying token, so the exchange rate was a huge number. And so this exploited a rounding error to redeem collateral which should not have been redeemable. So this left the protocol with an under-collateralized position, and the attacker was able to steal funds in this way. For BNO on the Binance Smart Chain, there was an emergency withdrawal function which led to incorrect accounting and excessive rewards. Arcadia, which is a lending protocol on Ethereum and Optimism, only performs health checks after all operations have been completed. The attacker took advantage of this by withdrawing their collateral and then re-entering the contract to liquidate and wipe out the debt. So the health check passed because the liquidate function basically wiped out the debt. And so the attacker was able to steal these funds from the protocol. Next, we have Libertify, which was also hacked due to a reentrancy exploit. In this case, the attacker re-entered the deposit function of the Libertify vault before the total shares had been updated. So this allowed the attacker to mint more shares than they should have really been able to mint, and this allowed the attacker to steal funds from the protocol. Next, we have Themis, which is another lending protocol, which was hacked on Arbitrum. Themis used a price calculation for an LP token, which was calculated by adding up the total value in a pool and dividing by the LP token supply. The attacker was able to manipulate this price by making a massive swap, essentially inflating the total value of the pool and therefore inflating the price of this LP token, and the attacker was then able to take a massive under-collateralized loan from Themis, relying on that inflated collateral value of the LP token. For CivFund, it was hacked on Ethereum, and CivFund had this callback function, which was intended to only be called by Uniswap v3. However, the attacker was able to spoof a Uniswap v3 pool and call this callback function in order to steal funds from users which had approved the contract. Next, we have Utopia on the Binance Smart Chain. In this case, there was an airdrop function which allowed the attacker to set the balance of the DEX pair to one way, and this allowed the attacker to drain liquidity from the DEX pool. The exploit on the FIST token was very similar. Also, we have Azuki DAO on Ethereum, which was exploited due to a classic signature replay attack. And finally, we have Bamboo AI on the Binance Smart Chain, which suffered a public burn exploit, which allowed the attacker to manipulate the balances or reserves of the DEX pool and resulted in the draining of liquidity from that DEX pool. Let's talk about some of the trends we've seen in June and July. First, we'll talk about monitoring. Now, the monitoring platform Hypernative actually detected 6 of the 9 largest hacks in real time. That's two-thirds of the largest hacks. Also, Hypernative detected the attack contract for all of these hacks, and so there was some possibility here to prevent these hacks before they actually happen. Also, for a third of these largest hacks, Hypernative also detected failed hack attempts. So this is another signal that could have been used to potentially pause the protocol and avoid the hack. At least 2 of the 9 largest hacks were front-run by MEV bots, and in both cases, the bots returned a fraction of the profits and kept some for themselves as a bounty. We saw lots of reentrancy exploits in both June and July. 3 of the 9 largest hacks were caused by read-only reentrancy issues, including Conic, EraLend, and Sturdy. One thing that's different this time is that we have the first instance of a non-lending protocol being hacked with this method. Conic is purely a yield farming protocol, and it was hacked due to a read-only reentrancy exploit. So this just shows you that it's not just lending protocols that can be exploited due to read-only reentrancy. Also, a novel reentrancy bug was exploited in the case of the Vyper issue. Classic reentrancy exploits were used for some of the smaller hacks, including Arcadia and Libertify. Price manipulation was another trend in June and July of 2023, and this is a trend that has continued from the rest of 2023. More than half of the largest hacks were caused by price manipulation of some sort, and at least 10 hacks overall in June and July were caused by price manipulation. 2 of the hacks were caused by forcing the protocol to make unfavorable trades at unfavorable prices. There were several different root causes for the manipulation of prices. In the case of Rodeo, the time-weighted price was manipulated. This is not something we've seen that much in 2023, but this clearly shows that it is possible to manipulate a time-weighted oracle, especially if it has low liquidity. Also, read-only reentrancy was used to manipulate the prices of several LP tokens. Finally, the manipulation of the balance ratio and reserve ratio within DEX pools were used to drain liquidity from these DEX pools, and this happened for a lot of the smaller exploits, including Utopia, FIST, Bamboo AI, and so on. Here are some of the other trends we've seen. At least 3 of the protocols had some type of leverage functionality, including Palmswap, Rodeo, and Sturdy. At least 3 protocols that were hacked were compound forks. At least 3 protocols were exploited for the second time in 2023. In the case of Conic Finance, it was exploited for the second time in the same day. At least 2 incidents occurred on ZK rollups, both on ZK Sync. So we have a hack in the form of EraLend, and then we have a rug pull which happened on the Conic Finance project. So it's likely that as ZK rollups gain more adoption, we'll see more and more of these hacks and rug pulls. At least 2 DEXs were hacked as well, including Palmswap and Biswap, and at least 2 hacks were caused by allowing fraudulent contracts to call privilege functions. In the case of Biswap, the attacker was able to call that migrate function. In the case of SibFund, the callback function was called by the attack contract instead of Uniswap v3. This brings us to the end of June and July. Thanks so much for joining us for this Hacks Roundup, and we hope you'll join us for the August Hacks Roundup, where we'll talk about the LeadSwap hack, Uworks network, and many more. Thanks again, and please follow us on Twitter and YouTube for more great security content.